Dr. Bernice A. King, you are the CEO of the King Center. Could you tell us about your journey and how you got to where you are today?
Well, I grew up in the household of Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Mrs. Coretta Scott King as their youngest child. My father was assassinated when I was 5 years old, as everybody knows. But I grew up in a home full of love and forgiveness, full of compassion for humanity, learning about serving humanity. But I had experienced a lot of losses with my father and then my uncle, who was mysteriously found in this swimming pool when I was 6 years old. He didn't drown. We're still trying to figure that out. And then at 11, my grandmother got shot in church. So although I grew up at home of all of this love, compassion, service to humanity, forgiveness, and things of that nature, I struggled emotionally to deal with all of those different losses. So I went through periods of a lot of anger and bitterness and resentment, and even a little bit of rage. But because I had a supportive environment around me, eventually through time and some counseling, I was able to get through much of that and went on to college and law school and theology school, ended up serving in ministry. But the entire time of my life, as a child, I saw my mother build the King Center. She founded it 2.5 months after my father's assassination, to be the hub of his life, legacy, and work, predominantly to get people to understand how he was able to bring about social change through nonviolence. And so she created as an institution where people would learn about the nonviolent teachings and trainings and education that went into everything they did during the civil rights movement. And so watching her build that institution, participating as a young person in some of their nonviolent workshops for young people, being in and around it as I continued my life, it kind of all caught up with me one day. And the things that I was doing on a volunteer basis. In 2012, I was asked to lead the King Center as the CEO. And I've been doing that since 2012, expanding our programmatic thrust to include a lot of education and training in nonviolence and things of that nature.
What are the actual aims and objectives of the King Center?
It's all about the vision of the beloved community that Josiah Royce really coined, a philosopher, Josiah Royce, and that my father eventually talked about in the late 1950s as being the aftermath of nonviolence. His vision of the beloved community where injustice ceases and love prevails, or a vision of a just, equitable, humane, and peaceful world. And so a lot of our work is geared towards empowering people to use my father's philosophy and methodology of nonviolence, which I kind of rephrased as Nonviolence 365, to help people build and create that just, humane, equitable, and peaceful world. And so we focus, as I said, a lot around, educating and training people, preparing them to address these difficult social issues in our world, to overcome the triple evils of violence, racism, and militarism that my father talked about through the means of nonviolence, which is a discipline. It is a way we define it as a love-centered way, and I would add a love and disciplined way of thinking, speaking, acting, and engaging that leads to personal, that's key, cultural, that's key, and societal transformation. So it's not just for a social justice movement. It's a way of life. And that's why we call it Nonviolence 365.
So, on the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, could you talk to us about the importance of justice, equality, diversity, and inclusion?
Justice, equality, diversity, and inclusion are all important in terms of creating a world where people feel like they belong, that they fit. that they are a part of, that they're valued. It is those components go into allowing people to truly live a full and dignified life. In the absence of those things, people are stripped from their essence and their personhood. So those are important in terms of or what we talked about earlier as the beloved community, but also important to the sustainability of our world house. People want to be treated fairly, and at the end of the day, they want to know that, this world is our world, not just for somebody else, but for me as well. And so justice and equality, diversity, and inclusion gives us the proper mindset to create that kind of world that in the end, people, as I said, are able to live a full life and a dignified life.
Since we've met, a lot's changed in the world since we spoke a year ago. It's frightening and concerning, to say the least. It begs the question as to where we are with racism. So where are we in relation to a world that's going to be free of racism? Where are we in that journey?
That's a very good question. I think that, one, going back to a word I used earlier, the dignity and value of a person, regardless of whatever group they identify with or are identified with, is important in our world. And we still have a world that values a certain kind of person greater than another. And so we have got to have what my father called, and I will reiterate, a revolution of values, where we become more person-centered than thing-centered. Because when we become more person-centered, we will value the contributions, the importance, and inclusion of people of different races and ethnicities. And so we are still fighting that battle. But to me, the real issue is not trying to just fix one thing after another. It's really trying to get the world to shift their mindset, to see that just because something is what people call white supremacy, that there's no such thing as that. We see all human beings, as supreme, as valuable, as important, as mattering, and that we set up, opportunities for everybody to prosper, for everybody to do well. It doesn't mean everybody has to be a millionaire, for everybody to be respected, in their personhood. So I think we're a long ways off from that, as evidenced by so much stuff that's happening, in our society, with the wedges, between, members of the Black community, and feelings around law enforcement. And it's not everybody in the Black community, but there is this sentiment that there is this racial, undertone and sometimes overtone, as it relates to the Black community and brown community, with law enforcement. We're still dealing with white supremacist groups and white nationalists that want to keep, their nations, all white, or all dominant, whatever particular group. And so we got a lot of work to do to try to change that. And I just suggest that we really study and embrace Martin Luther King Jr. and some of the things that our Pope has been saying, and leaders who are echoing those kind of sentiments.
If your dad were with us today, and wish he was, well, how do you think he'd see the situation as it presently stands right now?
I mean, it's kind of relative. There's some ways we have moved forward. I mean, there are, and this sounds weird to say with everything that's happening in our nation, in particular around voting. There are more registered voters, and particularly Black and brown voters in this nation than ever before. But yet we have all of these barriers and restrictions that, have been recently put in place to make it challenging. Not at the level that it was back in the day, but certainly it is still challenging, and it still, seems to be racially determined in terms of the lines, the political lines that are drawn. They're housed under party, but really it kind of disenfranchises people of color. I just think he would be troubled, not surprised necessarily by everything that's happening around this world, particularly with the lack of investment in some of our developing countries that are over in Africa. He challenged us around that front, that we had a responsibility to our brothers and sisters on the African continent, but they are part of our human family. And those of us who are doing better, in some of the more developed countries, have to find a way to come alongside of and make sure that they're empowered, that they're equipped, that they have, similar opportunities. But that's not the case. And that's not the case, again, because of what I said earlier. We still devalue Black in the world. There's a hierarchy, when it comes to people and groups in our world. We've got to change that. And it's going to change when we continue to raise more leaders who honor the personhood of every individual. And they don't operate according to this hierarchical thinking. So it may be some years before we see the true transformation. But I think if we continue to focus on younger generations and really teaching them, that this is a diverse world. And in this diverse world, we have to make sure that the opportunities are there for all people, that we need to remove any kind of barriers that would, segregate, that would diminish and demean people and not allow them to have the proper opportunities and entry points to do well as individuals, as communities, and even as a nation.
It's important for people to feel inspired and empowered when thinking about the elimination of racial discrimination. Have you seen any examples that show us that this breakthrough is possible?
I haven't seen it yet on a systemic level. And on the interpersonal level, I've seen it in two instances. There is a story about a young lady, a Black woman, that lived in the south part of the United States of America, the southern part, in Mississippi. And Mississippi had a flag. Many of the southern states in the United States have had flags with Confederate symbols, representing very oppressive time periods for Blacks in America. And there's been these efforts afoot to do away with these flags and symbols of statues and all that, of Confederate figures. And so this particular lady started a campaign to do away with the state flag in Mississippi. And some people responded on her Facebook page with some threatening words. And there was a gentleman who knew her, a white gentleman, who reached out or commented, "Hey, I don't agree with you regarding the flag, but I'm concerned about your well-being." And so she decided to invite him to her backyard to have a conversation. And the first thing she asked him, that's the key word, the first thing she asked him, instead of telling him something about how she felt about the flag, because sometimes these things can be very emotional, she asked, "What does the flag mean to you?" And she did it in such a genuine way, like wanting to really understand, how come this flag means so much to you? And because she did that, it kind of broke him down, and she wanted to know, well, what did it mean to her? And so they were able to forge this conversation. And over time, he began to realize that she was more important than the flag. Now, it took him a minute. He didn't go home immediately and change, the flag that he had at his own home. But that seed was planted. And within a year, he took it down at his own home. And he joined her in her efforts. And last year, I'm not saying they're responsible, they were a part of the groups that helped to eventually change the flag in Mississippi. So the state of Mississippi eventually voted on a new flag. So good for them in breaking through. There's another gentleman in the state of Maryland in the United States, a black gentleman, a jazz singer, a blues singer. He wanted to know why do the Klan hate him? How can you hate me and you don't know me? His name is Daryl Davis. And he just decided, well, I'm going to go and find out. I'm going to go and connect with some of these Klansmen. And he did that. He sat down with them, went to lunch with them, had conversations with them, went to some of their little events. And over time, at least 25 or more ended up befriending him, or he ended up befriending them. They denounced the Klan, gave him the robe, and actually he helped to dismantle any formalized Klan organization in the state of Maryland. It takes those kind of efforts. We cannot cancel people. We cannot push them off to the side. You know, if you have a heart of love and you have a heart of compassion and understanding the interconnectedness and interrelatedness in life, and also you understand that people come from these backgrounds and stories, that they didn't just end up here. There's something that happened in their life that ended up in that place to have that kind of thinking, because we're not born with hate, you know. And so when we have enough people who are willing to cross those kind of lines, I think we can begin to bring about a more sense of a true beloved community and help to create justice, equity, and peace for all people.
So we have wars, the destruction of our planet, violence in our communities. Where do you, I mean, we know all of these things are going on, but I'm interested in, where do you draw your hope and inspiration, you know, despite everything that's going on around us?
Well, my first hope comes from my faith. You know, as a Christian, I have a strong belief in the fact that God triumphs over evil, that good triumphs over evil, that no matter how dark and dreary it gets, there's going to be a breakthrough. My mother used to always say to me, baby, the darkest hour is always before the dawn. So she was reassuring me, yes, it's going to be dark, but there will come a dawn. So don't be discouraged. Keep moving, keep working, keep doing what is necessary, because you're part of the force that will bring that daylight into the world, that will bring that change. And that's what they believe. So I also rely upon history. You know, I'm fortunate to be a part of a family that helped to bend that moral arc of the universe that my father talked about being long, but it bends towards justice. I'm a part of that family and bloodline that helped to bend that moral arc towards justice. And I saw them succeed in that regard. Did they accomplish everything for all of us? No, because unfortunately, like my mother said, struggle is a never-ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. We all have to contribute to bending that arc towards justice and continuing to bend it from generation to generation. But they did their part and they were able to overcome. So I draw strength from that. I draw strength from all of the world, the ancestors in the world who have been faced with very dark, difficult times. They've been faced with wars before. We think we're the first generation to deal with these problems. No, we're not. The only difference today is that we have more access in the nick of time to know what's happening in the world, and we got more people voicing their opinions about it. So it's clouding up things because you got all these voices. You know, so technology on the one hand has allowed us to see more and know more, but also it has created a challenge in terms of sorting it out and helping to get a clear message through to people so that we can stay focused on what is just and good and fair and right for people. They've seen it. Great Depression. My grandfather made it through the Great Depression. So if he made it through the Great Depression, if your ancestors made it through World War I, War II, some people did die, yes. But if humanity made it through, we can make through the things that we are challenged with as well. And we can keep bending the arc towards just, humane, equitable, and peaceful outcomes.
Incredible to hear you say those things. So inspiring. Thank you for that. Okay, so if you're a parent or a teacher, what resources does the King Center have to support us all on our journey towards the elimination of racial discrimination?
We have a program called Students with King. We've reached over 1 million in the world to date. We have a reading corner related to that. And we have conversations with people who either lived through that time period of my father's movement, knew or worked with my mother and or father, or have studied and understand that time period. So we can continue to teach and educate and expose young people to that particular world that they were living in at the time. I'm excited about something we just launched through a partnership with Microsoft Flip, where teachers can access an educational resource connected to a timeline related to the King Center. If you go to thekingcenter.org and you click timeline, there's a piece there called Dear Coretta. It's a timeline of the King Center related to the legacy of Mrs. Coretta Scott King. So you find out more about her from childhood all the way through the establishment of the King Center and the things she did on the heels of establishing the King Center. And there's an educational resource there. For instance, my mother was an activist at a very young age. So from reading and visiting the timeline, you read about Ms. King as an activist. So they ask you, what is an activist? Then they say, what are the things in this world that you care about that you want to take action on? So you have to be able to articulate that after you go to their timeline. So that's another resource there. We have our beloved Community Leadership Academy. We have close to 100 students now from about 5 or so countries. They're learning to become courageous, conscientious, and compassionate leaders who critically think about the problems in the world, and we expose them to the philosophy and methodology of nonviolence on their level. Then finally, we have the first ever in the world, I have to say that, the first ever in the world, Nonviolence 365 e-learning. That's an opportunity for students to take a course, and you learn really about nonviolence, what it is. What is violence? Because people think violence is just physical. I've had many people say, I'm not violent, because they're not physically violent, but they don't realize speech can be violent. They don't realize certain decisions you make and how you make them can create violence against someone. So we teach people about that. We teach them about the difference between conflict and violence. You know, what escalation looks like, how to take Dr. King's principles of nonviolence and steps of nonviolence to address conflict and injustice. And looking at the historical background of how they used it. And now, here are some scenarios that we want you to go through that you can think through, and how would you respond to each of these? So, you know, there are opportunities for people to engage history, reading, video from experts who either lived through the movement, who are experts in nonviolence, et cetera. It's a very holistic learning experience, because we want people to realize nonviolence that Dr. King not only expanded and utilized in the movement, but he lived it as a way of life. We want people to understand that it's for the workplace, it's for the home. We want to make sure that we fulfill the mandate that Dr. King left for us when he spoke to the university in Oslo during the time that he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize. At that lecture he gave, he said, I suggest that the philosophy
and strategy of nonviolence become immediately a subject for study and for serious experimentation in every field of human conflict, by no means excluding the relations between nations.
And how else can that happen but having this, you know, e-learning experience that wherever you are in the world, you can now study. As he said, it needs to become a source of study. So now you can study it online at your own pace. And then we can all begin to seriously experiment with it in all these fields of human conflict and even those, relationships between nations.
Incredible. I mean, there's only one last thing to say. I mean, apart from we've just heard there about the King Center and all the different resources that we can utilize, which is wonderful that you've created that. Can I ask you, is there any other way that people can support you and your work?
I'm just so passionate about people getting this nonviolence. I mean, a lot of people that I've spoken to, I think it's not registering for them because they keep thinking, this is just for people who are involved in a movement. And I'm saying, no, this is for all of us. Nonviolence. It is a prescription to our healthy relationships. It's a prescription to healthy companies, businesses, communities, nations. It's a prescription to us creating this just, humane, equitable, and peaceful world. So I need people to take it seriously because it's needed. And until we take it seriously, we're still going to be facing all of these problems. But when we fully understand it and can embrace it, we will see a different world. So that's the one main thing. And always we can use financial support because we're a nonprofit institution. It takes dollars to be able to do that because we want to reach the world with nonviolence because it is the pathway to the beloved community.
Well, absolutely amazing. And I think if people aren't, they should also follow you on social media, which I do. And I love all of the posts that you make. So thank you for that. It's an absolute inspiration to listen to you. Thanks for your support of Anti-Racism Live and the Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and continue with this groundbreaking, incredible work that you do. We're all behind you. And thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.